There are 5 great traits that top leaders possess. And when you understand these traits, you can take ownership of these traits, develop them in yourself, and become a leader that you want to be for your industry. So why should you care about what traits other people possess? Because success leaves clues. And the most successful leaders who have become the top leaders of their industry, they're leaving clues all the time. But oftentimes we're so busy in our work that we don't really look at what makes someone so successful. What are the traits that are needed to be great leaders? And how might I develop them for myself? So in this video, what I'm going to talk about are these 5 traits of the greats. And therefore, when you reflect on these 5 great traits, I encourage you to make a list, take note of it, make a list of these 5 great traits, and put a check mark besides the ones you already possess. And the ones that you don't yet possess, circle them and decide in the new year that that's what you're going to work on. So this is going to be your personal development plan. And 1 year later, just watch how your life is going to change. So with that, let's dive right in. When I talk about the top leaders, now it's interesting because top leader for me may not be how you define top leader, but here's what I can say about that. The top leaders is not always about money, but it almost always includes money. So here's what I mean by that. If you look at the top authors around the world, they are the ones that make more money. If you look at the top athletes out there, they're the ones that also get all the deals, the sponsorships. They also are the ones that make the top income. If you look at the top speakers, the top business owners, the top leaders of their industry, they're the ones that are in the top percentiles of income earned, because it almost always includes money. Now, I understand that your goal of being a top leader in your industry may not be predominantly or primarily about money, but understand that wealth is created when you become a top leader of your industry. That means that the value that you provide in your industry is of top notch, and fair value exchange does include money. So although I'm not going to be talking about revenue or income generated in this video, I just want to make sure that we are all on the same page, understanding that when I say top leader, I'm not referring to the ones that make the most money, but they are the ones that create a great value in the marketplace and get a fair exchange from that. So let's dive right in and talk about the 5 traits. Now, traits are human traits that involve certain characteristics. So when we talk about human traits, there are behaviors involved, there are thought patterns involved, there are states of being involved in that. And we're going to go dive deep into each one. So let's talk about the first trait of top leaders. The first trait of top leaders that really separates them from everyone else is that top leaders focus on self-governance. Self-governance means that an individual is governing themselves, that they have mastered their thoughts, that they have mastered their mind, they've mastered their behaviors, they've mastered their actions and how they make decisions. And this is where they have absolute clarity on what they can control versus what they cannot control. This is extremely important. I work with a lot of executives in my coaching programs, and oftentimes the executives that work with me, they're really good at what they do. They're educated. They've had so much success in their career path, but at some point they reach a threshold where they desire to become greater leaders. They desire to lead bigger opportunities. But it's like, how do I cross that threshold into there? And what's demanded of them to be able to cross that threshold is not more education. It's not more technical knowledge. It's not more years of experience. And it's definitely not understanding or being better at what they do. It's not about that. It primarily, first of all, it's around understanding what you can control versus what you cannot control. Let's talk about first what you cannot control. When it comes to what you cannot control, it's really simple. And it's also complicated at the same time. Because the things that you cannot control is everything outside of you. Everything outside of you. It is the weather. It is other people. It is circumstances. They are situations. There are things that happen around you. There are words that get exchanged outside of you. Everything outside of you that is not within your mind and within your body, you don't have control over those things. So let's just get that out for now. That's outside of your control. Now, that might seem overwhelming, Because doesn't that constitute the majority of your life? If it's everything outside of you and in your circumstances, that's the majority of it. So what's left that you can control? And this is where it's important. Now, earlier I said that everything outside of your mind and your body you cannot control. Even there are certain things within your body you cannot control. Like, for example, when your heart's going to take the last beat, you can't control that. When your arteries are going to continue to carry blood flow to vital parts of your body, you can't control that. So those are still within your body. So then what's left? What are the things you can control? Really, they are just three things. They are your perceptions, your actions, and your emotions. Those are the only things you can control. And these are the most important things. Why? Because your perceptions, your actions, and your emotions are determining factors. Determining factors are the things that determine your future, that determine your trajectory, that determine your outcomes in terms of your whole life as a whole. So these are determining factors. Everything else outside of you that you cannot control, that makes up, I agree, the more overwhelming proportion of it, those are contributing factors, which means that they might have an influence on what they contribute in your life. Like, for example, if someone says something bad about you, you have no control over what people say. And admittedly, if they say something bad about you, that can contribute to the experience you have, but they don't determine your trajectory. They don't determine your outcomes. That's the key. For your perceptions, your actions, and your emotions, they determine your outcomes. Here's what I mean by that. Let's first of all talk about your perceptions. Your perceptions are how you see the world around you, how you observe the things going on around you from the place on which you stand. They are your perceptions. Now, the way you see the things around you create everything that happens on the inside. For example, if you observe an event that's taking place near you and you see all the positive things about it, you see the advantages of it, you are listening to what people are saying, and through your perceptions, you have judgments, you have expectations, you have a mindset, you've created some mental models around what you've just observed. And as a result of that, those perceptions, the sum of all the perceptions you've had in that moment, you go on to create a mental model, a way of being, a way of thinking, a way of philosophizing. And that affects the things you see from that point forward. And you have absolute control over your perceptions. Your perceptions are going to run your life. They're going to run your thought patterns until you become aware of it, until you intersect. So that's the first part. The first thing you have control over is your perceptions. The second area where you have absolute control over are your actions. Now, most of the times, your actions follow from your perceptions. Depending on what you see around you that create your worldview, that create your beliefs and your mindset around things, now your actions is what you do as a result of what you observe. Those are your actions. Inactions are also actions, by the way. If you choose to freeze, if you choose to ignore, if you choose to walk away, and you choose not to take action, and inaction is just as much as an action. And your actions, you have absolute control over them. Even though sometimes it feels like you don't have control over them, you do. And those moments where it feels like you don't have control over them are moments where, for example, it is very overwhelming, or there's an intensity, an urgency inside. That's where it can feel like you don't have control, and which leads us to the third area of control, which is your emotions. Your emotions are that which you feel from within, that other people may be able to observe based on your actions and how you show up, but they can't possibly understand unless you are articulate in terms of how you feel. Now, emotions is everything to do with your inner world. Your inner world is the world inside of you that is very vast. It's very deep. It's very vast. It's so vast, exactly, that sometimes you don't even understand it, that you don't even know the depths of what's really going on. Haven't you ever had any of those moments where you make a certain decision and later on, even shortly after that, you reflect on the decision you made and you kind of go, why did I just do that? Or why did I just say that? I don't know where that came from. I can't believe I made that decision. Hasn't that ever happened to you? And that happens because the inner world is so deep, it's so vast, that if you don't seek to understand that, if you don't seek to understand the drivers of the things that are happening inside of you, sometimes we can pilot through life without being in the driver's seat. We can coast through life. We can be passive through life. We can just be on cruise mode. And that is a lack of self-governance. When we're cruising through life, when we aren't in control of our actions, when our emotions control us more than we control them, that's when we cruise through life. And in those moments, we wonder why we haven't been able to step up into leadership. Because the first rule about leadership is if you want to become a top leader in leading others, in leading teams, you must first be able to lead yourself. And leading yourself starts with self-governance. Have you mastered your perceptions? Have you mastered your actions? Have you mastered your emotions, or are your emotions running you? And all of these three things, your perceptions, your actions, and your emotions, those are the only things you have absolute control over, but they are more than enough to create the results and the outcomes you want in your life. They are more than sufficient. Why? Because these three things work together synergistically to create your outcomes. Let me give you an example. Sometimes your emotions can be so intense, and if you haven't mastered your emotions, that means your emotions have mastered you. And as a result of these intense emotions, sometimes we feel the emotions so deeply that we can't get ourselves, or we can't bring ourselves to do the things that we know we need to do. And we procrastinate, or we hesitate, or we are sitting on the fence and we don't take the action we need to take. And sometimes we can kick ourselves and regret it later on. So that is one example of how these three things are synergistically intertwined. Sometimes, as I mentioned before, your perceptions, what you observe around you, the way that you create a mindset about it, the way you create your beliefs around it, sometimes depending on what you see, triggers you internally, and that affects your actions, and you don't quite take the action you need to take. Or sometimes the actions come first. You took a certain action, not knowing exactly what you were doing or why you were doing it. It was a reactionary response, and the outcomes of that reaction created an intense emotion just by observing what happened next, the consequences of those actions. And there's a spiral that happens when we are not self-governed. So one of the distinguishing features of top leaders, the first great trait of top leaders, is that they focus on self-governance. Self-governance, by the way, is a journey. It's not a destination. Being able to master these three things means that first, you must be able to distinguish the difference between determining factors and contributing factors and not confuse the two. One of the biggest mistakes I see aspiring leaders make is that they confuse the two. They believe that determining factors are contributing factors and vice versa. And this is where, if you believe that contributing factors are determining factors, this is where there's a lot of victimhood, believing that what other people can say can determine your future, or believing that your circumstances can dictate your outcomes. And that gets into victimhood as well. And it can also get into blaming other people for not giving you an opportunity, blaming other people for not being able to notice you or not being able to choose you from the crowd. And therefore, that leads to the second action of not taking ownership of what the things that we need to do to be able to create those opportunities. So this is where there's a confusion between determining factors and contributing factors, is a perpetuation of the lack of self-governance. So the top leaders understand this, and they focus on this as their primary focus of personal growth. If you desire to become a top leader in your industry, and you have a path that you envision that you want to step into, the trajectory of your career moving forward, that career development is going to be the most important personal development journey of your life. And if it is something you're seriously committed to, now and in the new year and in the year after that and in the years subsequently after that, then I invite you to work with me. Every single week, I provide training on how to develop self-governance. I provide coaching and mentorship around how do we become the person to be able to create our desired outcomes, and how do we manage situational challenges? How do we navigate through relationship challenges? And I provide a tremendous amount of coaching, training, and support around that. So if you're serious about getting the support you need to become the top leader of your industry, then I invite you, below this video, there is a link to book a call to talk to one of my trusted career advisors. And this is where we're going to explore whether or not what your goals are, what your needs are, and what your current situation is. And then they're going to help you to create an action plan on how to get to where you are, to where you want to be. And if it's the right fit, then you're going to be invited into the mentorship, and I look forward to working with you personally on the inside. So that's trait number one. Trait number one is to focus on self-governance. Trait number two of top leaders is the practice of producing mastery to escape mediocrity. Now, I want to work backwards here. Let's talk about mediocrity. What is mediocrity? Mediocrity is mediocre. It is average. It is not great, sometimes not very good, but just, it's all right. It's okay. That is mediocrity. Great leaders, the top leaders, practice producing mastery to escape mediocrity. So what is mastery? If mediocrity is okay, not great, sometimes not good, but okay, it's average, well, I'm just going to accept it for what it is, then mastery is the ability to execute effortlessly with limited use of mental resources, which means that when you've mastered it, it becomes second nature. Everything that you are successful at right now, all of the skills that you can exude, that all of the challenges that you can navigate that are second nature to you, they were once very difficult for you as well. And at one point in your life, before you've mastered that thing, you couldn't produce the success even with all of your efforts. So mastery is the practice of learning differently. And it all starts with learning. If you haven't mastered something in your life, it could be communications, it could be leadership skills, it could be diplomacy. If you haven't mastered something that is necessary for you to master to get to the next level, it starts with the ability to learn differently. You see, the college education system and in the school system, especially starting in elementary school and high school, they programmed us to believe that the purpose of learning was to know something, was to gain knowledge. I submit to you, if that is what you believe, then it's going to be very difficult to master the things that are necessary. Because once you've accumulated knowledge and you have a knowledge base, it doesn't always translate to mastery. It just means you know a bunch of things. Now, I would like to offer you a different purpose of learning. The purpose of learning is not just to know things, is not knowledge. The purpose of learning is mastery. When you learn for the purpose of mastery, now what you can do is you can achieve incremental mastery, where all of these things that you set on the journey to learn masterfully become second nature. And when you master one thing, now you can move on to mastering the next thing. And it's called mastery stacking. All of the skills that are needed to take you to the next level of your professional development. You master one thing, you master the next thing, you stack your mastery on top of each other. And that is the leverage that is needed to become a top leader of your industry. So what's the process of mastery? In a nutshell, it starts with learning differently. What do I mean by learning differently? It means learning with the mindset, with the intention of mastery. And once you've accumulated the right set of knowledge, the next thing is to assimilate that knowledge into an understanding. Because you cannot apply your knowledge until you truly understand it. And I have firsthand experience in that. I finished my PhD in 4 years. And when I did my PhD, I was in such a hurry to complete it because I really wanted to get my first job after my PhD. So I did my PhD, and in a PhD, you do a dissertation and you have the final defense of your dissertation. And supposedly, when you're a PhD, you're a knowledge creator. So when I did my research in 4 years, I'm creating new knowledge that does not yet exist. And then the PhD committee is supposed to ask me questions on it to see how deep my knowledge is and how broad my knowledge is in the area of neuroscience. Was my PhD was in neuroscience. So here I am, I graduated. They gave me my PhD. I graduated, got my degree in hand, got my first job after my PhD. And my first job was now to lead a nationwide project, a research project. The purpose of that research project was to improve the nationwide healthcare for patients that are suffering from brain trauma. That was the whole research project. So my supervisor at the time introduces me as Dr. Grace Lee here. She's going to lead this research project. And I'm standing in front of the room as I'm being introduced, and everyone around me were established in their career paths. We had some neurologists, we had other neuroscientists, we had neuroethicists, we had stakeholders in the room. And my supervisor introduced me as the leader of this industry. And then it was basically, okay, take it away, Dr. Grace, take it away. And I had a deer in headlights moment. I had to lead this project based on what I know, what I learned from my PhD. But now this was the real world. There was a real world application. There were patients at stake that we were improving their lives, these patients. And I had a deer in headlights moment because I realized that right then and there, I didn't really understand what I know in order to apply it in leading this research project. So let this be an aha moment for you. Just because you have a body of knowledge, just because you have a degree, a diploma, a license, when it comes to real world situations, when there are an infinite number of nuances, it doesn't mean that you can apply what you know from academia, because it requires a process of assimilation before you have the understanding that is necessary that you can apply. So that's the next step of achieving mastery, assimilating that knowledge base into a depth of understanding. And you know you understand your knowledge when you can develop your own insights around it. If you cannot, if you're regurgitating it, if you're memorizing, if you are dependent upon the words or what other people are saying, then you don't really have a depth of understanding yet. So that's the next step, assimilating your knowledge into an understanding. Once you have a genuine understanding, and which means you can develop your own insights around it, the next step after that is now you start applying the knowledge. You've ever heard that saying, knowledge is not power, application of knowledge is power. Well, they skipped a step in that phrase. You can't start applying your knowledge until you have understanding. So now you have understanding, then you can start applying the knowledge. And I would recommend when you start to apply your knowledge, to start with low risk situations. Why? Because if you're beginning to apply the newly assimilated knowledge, you need to have factored in some room for failure, because success and failure happen simultaneously. You can't have success without failure, and you can't have failure without success. So you must factor in a leniency for failure. And if you're jumping into the deep end and you're taking great risk into the real world in this newly assimilated knowledge, sometimes you might find that the consequences to failure are unacceptable or they're too great. That's why I would recommend when you begin to apply your knowledge after your understanding to start with low risk, and then you incrementally increase the risk depending on the development of mastery. And over time, through repetition, then you will have mastered it, which means that now you can execute effortlessly with limited use of mental resources because it becomes second nature, and it's through repetition. And this is where, through repetition, the top leaders exude patient perseverance. Consistent and patient perseverance. They can't help it. That's just who they are. They have patient perseverance. They won't stop, and they don't want to. So many times when you're on this journey towards mastery, it's so easy to give up when it's hard. Or it's so easy to try in some period of time and notice that, oh, I'm not getting results, it's not working, and then to stop the activity right away because it's not working. But you see, there's no such a thing as work that doesn't work. It may not be working yet, but I guarantee it's working. It's not working yet, but it's working on you. So the work that you do on it must first work on you long enough. And when it works on you, you become the person, you develop the person into the leader you need to be. And then eventually it starts to work for you. It works on you for a period of time, and then it starts to work for you. The question is, do you have the consistent, patient perseverance to last through the season while it's working on you? Do you have that patient perseverance to last through that until it begins to work for you? And it's a scientific principle that there's no such a thing as work that doesn't work. Because if you think about work, what is work? Work is force applied over distance. The scientific equation for work is W, which is work, equals FD, force times distance. It's force applied over distance. So if you apply a force to it, if you put the effort, you're applying the force to that thing that you're putting work on, there's no such a thing as a negative force. There's no such a thing as work that is zero that cancels itself out. If you're putting effort into it, it's a positive number. F is a positive number. And you do that over a distance, over time or distance. W equals FD. There's no such a thing as zero work. It either works on you or it works for you. So this is the second trait of top leaders, is that they are consistent at the practice of producing mastery to escape mediocrity, because mediocrity is an unacceptable outcome to them. They have a central aim to become masters of it. First of all, they master themselves, and then they master the things they need to master in order to become the top leaders. Now let's talk about the third trait. The third trait of top leaders that differentiate from everybody else is that the top leaders, they stand up to stand out for the truth instead of fitting in to be liked. This one is really important because so much of our society and so much of the generations as you're growing up, so much about that is about being liked. Have you ever had such a fear about what other people think about you? Such a fear that if I speak up in front of this meeting, if I give this presentation in front of my higher ups, that I don't want to be criticized. I don't want to be embarrassed. I don't want them to say anything bad about me or in front of me or when I'm not there. There is such a huge focus around fitting in and being liked that the fear of adversity sometimes stops us in our tracks. But the top leaders understand that adversity is a necessary part of the journey. And it is advantageous to experience adversity because it develops your strength. It develops your fortitude. So top leaders stand up to stand out for the truth. So what does that mean? It means that they are truth seekers. They look for the truth. They look for the truth so that they can speak the truth and bring the truth in their conversations. So what is the truth? The truth is not the same thing as what's true, because what's true today may not be true tomorrow. For example, what's true for me right now as I look out the window is that it is sunny, it's blue skies, and it's not raining. That's true right now, but it may not be true tomorrow. It may not be true 2 hours from now. But the leaders, the top leaders, don't just seek for what's true or what's true according to someone's opinion or someone else's philosophy. They seek for the truth. The truth is true today, it's going to be true tomorrow, and it's going to be true into the future. So what are the truths? Truths are the principles. They bring the truth. And you know that something is the truth because the truth is its own defense. Have you ever noticed that when you speak the truth, that you don't need to prove yourself? It's its own defense. But have you noticed that when you speak a lie or a partial truth, you need to bring all sorts of other lies, all sorts of other stories to protect it, to cover it? And there's more anxieties, there's more chaos associated with that. So the top leaders stand up to stand out to bring the truth, and they don't need to worry. They don't have anxiety over other people's reactions because they don't need to be liked. They're not seeking popularity. They're seeking purpose instead of popularity. Most people seek the pleasure of support and they want to escape the pain of an antagonist. But antagony and protagonist happen simultaneously. Have you ever noticed that? You can come up with your best ideas in the meetings, and you're going to have some people who will support it, some people who will challenge it, some people who think that's a great idea, some people who think that's a bad idea. The only question you need to answer is, which one are you going to focus on? Are you focusing on the pleasure of support, or are you focusing on the pain of antagony? And this is the biggest thing that prevents people from being able to step up into their leadership, is the fear of antagony, the fear of that. Be aware of your fear of opposing opinions. Opinions are just that, they are opinions. When you step up into your leadership, you will necessarily become more visible. And when you become more visible, you will necessarily have haters. You will necessarily have trolls. You will necessarily have people who disagree with you for whatever reason. Be aware of your fear of opposing opinions. Be aware of how your fears, which is your emotion, be aware of how your emotions are running you. Are they running you, or are you in control of your emotions? I've been programmed since the dawn of the industrial era. We have been programmed, we have been designed to be mentally weak. The corporate systems, the school systems, the political systems, societal systems, cultural systems in this world have been programming us and programming people to be mentally weak, to want to be liked, to want to fit in, to want to be complacent so that we don't rock the boat, so we don't poke the bear, so we don't shake it up too much, so we don't create too much of a ripple. We have been programmed to be mentally weak. But the game of leadership, top leadership, is not for the mentally weak. It is not for the mentally weak, and is definitely not a spectator sport. It is one where it requires your action. It requires your consciousness. It requires your awareness of self, your relationship with yourself, and your relationship to your environment around you and the people around you. The question is, how have you been mentally weak? How have you been fearing what other people think? How have you been fearing what other people are saying about you? Instead, what if you focused on the truth? What if you focused on becoming a truth seeker? What if you focused and developed your discernment, your ability to discern the truths from what's true? And what if you stepped up into your calling to be a bringer of truth in the world? Watch how that would change your life, and watch how that would change your career trajectory. So that's the third great trait of the top leaders, is that they stand up to stand out for the truth instead of fitting in to be liked. This takes us to the fourth trait of top leaders. They have meaningful perspectives. So what are meaningful perspectives? Let's talk about the word meaningful. The root word of meaningful is mean. The mean. Now in math, the mean is in the middle between the two extremes. So you think about the mean in math. In life, we say we desire more meaningfulness. We desire meaningfulness in our relationships. We want to make meaning out of our purpose. So what is meaningful? It really goes back to the mean. It is in the middle between the two extremes. So what does that mean? It means that in order for you to experience meaningfulness, that there must be a balance of the pairs of opposites. What are the opposites in life? Opposites in life, like challenge and support, like failure and success, like antagonist and protagonist, like positives and negatives, like people who are nice to you and mean to you. The balance of the pairs of opposites, the intersection of those opposites, is where you experience meaningfulness. It's also where you experience maximum growth and development. Now, the top leaders have meaningful perspectives. This means that they can see both sides of what they observe in their perspective. So remember, perspective is what you see as you observe the things happening around you from the place on which you stand. So the top leaders, when they observe what's going on around them and they see problems and they see issues, they also see the other side. They're able to flip it. What you may be experiencing, the problem is that when you see a problem and you see a challenge, that's probably all you see is the problem and why that's a problem and how that's going to be consequential and how that's going to be a problem for you and what the negative consequences are. Chances are that's all you see. But your problem, the problem, cannot exist as only a problem. And the top leaders know this because they can simultaneously see both the problem and the advantage. They can simultaneously see the advantage and the disadvantage, the positives and negatives. And this is what gives them a meaningful perspective. When you develop a meaningful perspective about things, about people, around relationships, around the events that happen around you in the company and in your teams, when you develop these meaningful relationships and you can see simultaneously the two sides of things, you are more objective. You are more neutral, and instead you're not emotionally volatile, but you are more neutral and objective. Think about it. Have you ever experienced a problem on your teams? Maybe you experienced a situation with a team member and now you're kind of feeling that this was a very toxic relationship and the toxicity seems to grow and develop and escalate. That only happens when you see only the problem, when you see only the negative. But a meaningful perspective, there's a scientific principle behind that. And here's the scientific principle. The scientific principle is in physics, action-reaction. It's an action-reaction. You cannot have one without the other. You cannot have one-sided things. For example, you cannot have a one-sided slice of bread. You cannot have a one-sided a coin. You cannot have a one-sided piece of paper. You also cannot have a one-sided person. People are not one-sided. People are multiple-sided. They're dynamic. You also cannot have a one-sided situation. You also, because in a situation, there are both positives and negatives in that situation. There's things that can benefit you and there's things that can harm you. There's also no such a thing as a one-sided problem. So top leaders understand this. And when you are neutral and objective in your perspective and you have meaningful perspectives, you activate the more innovative parts of your brain that can create solutions and that create a way to move forward and that create momentum. So this is the fourth trait of a top leader, meaningful perspectives. So now let's talk about the fifth trait. The fifth trait of top leaders is that they have the potential to produce in proportion to the price that they paid. Their potential to produce is in direct proportion to the price that they paid. So what do I mean by that? The price that they paid is the sacrifice that they made to get to where they're at. Make no mistake about it. I know you desire success. We all do. And you define success very differently from other people. It's very unique to you. And it's great to have a personal definition of success. But regardless of what your definition of success is, there is a price to success. There's a price and a sacrifice to achieve the success that you define for yourself. And that's why success does not come easy. And that's why there's no such a thing as an overnight success. Because there's a price that you pay. You see, the top leaders in the industries, they're willing to pay a great price for success. They've made great sacrifices. And they've paid a high price for their success. Now, when I say they've paid a high price, I don't necessarily mean that they sacrificed their relationships, they sacrificed their marriage, that's not what I mean. Sometimes a great price for success could mean a monetary investment. They invested in the best mentors. They invested in the best people that they can learn from. They invested in themselves. Sometimes a great price for success could mean that they gave up having work-life balance. And they were in a long season of focus, working hard, and working diligently and with great discipline. That's a price for success. But you see, a lot of times we create this definition of success and it's worthy success, but then we get on the path to creating that success, and then we come into some difficulty, we come into some discomforts, and then we give up because in a sense, the price for success is not worth the outcome. And that's a decision that we all have to make. You got to decide for yourself, is the price of success worthy of the outcome you desire to achieve? And when you pay that price for success, the top leaders they've paid a price. Their potential to produce is in direct proportion to that price that they paid. Because up until now, you've paid a price for success too. And if you are still desiring to become greater in your leadership, and you're looking towards someone who has the leadership level that you want to be in, you've paid a certain price for success, they've paid a certain price for success, and your potential to produce is in proportion to the price that you've paid. But you see, there's an inequality in terms of prices people have paid. In any organization, in any team, there's an inequality in terms of the inputs that people take to it. You've heard of the 80-20 rule, which is hardly a rule, and it's definitely not a law of nature, but they talk about it like that, the 80-20 principle. And the 80-20 principle says that 80% of the outcomes are produced by only 20% of the people. But you see, it's hardly a rule, and it's not a law. It could easily be in a company, in a team or in a company, that it could be a 50-1 ratio, where 50% of the outcomes was produced by 1% of the people on that team. All I'm saying is that what the 80-20 principle, or whatever those numbers could be, they may not always be 80-20. It could be 50-1. It could be 100-1. It could be 60-30. There's an imbalance where the individuals who are making the sacrifices, who are paying the higher price to produce, they have a greater potential, and their production, their productivity is in proportion to the input that they have and to the length of the time over which they apply those inputs. And as a result of that, the value they receive in return, think about promotions, opportunities, visibility, think about the praises, think about all of those things. The value they get in return is also in proportion to the potential they produce. It's a cycle. Are you willing to pay the price for success? And is the price you're paying for success in proportion to the productivity you want to have? It's an important question to ask. So let's talk about the personal development plan. I asked you at the start of this video to put a circle around the traits that you have not quite developed yet, and commit that those are the ones you're going to work on. If you will work on these 5 things, number 1, if you will work on having clarity of what you can control and what you cannot control, and being focused on mastering your perceptions, your actions, and your emotions, if you will focus on producing mastery to escape mediocrity by learning differently, by assimilating your knowledge into understanding and applying that knowledge over time, if you will work on standing up to stand out to be a bringer of the truth instead of focusing on fitting in and be liked, if you will focus on balancing your perspectives to create more meaning and objectivity, if you will focus on producing, increasing your potential to produce, because you are paying the price for success, in increasing your standards to the sacrifices that you're willing to make. If you will focus on these things, over time, your life is going to change, and your career trajectory is going to change. And I'm excited for you in what you're going to create. So with that, to summarize, these are the 5 traits of the greats of top leaders. And I look forward to the results that you can produce, and that you can hone in on the fact that success leaves clues. So with that, have a great week ahead, and I look forward to reconnecting with you on my next live stream next week. Take care, and bye for now.